Welcome back, 6303. This video is the third in the series of breaking apart a review of literature, and in this video we're going to discuss the introduction as well as the chapter summary. You should write your introduction after you have written out your themes, your critique of empirical studies, and your gaps in literature. And the very last thing that you're going to write for your Chapter 2 review of literature is the chapter summary. I want you to pull up Jill's review of literature and briefly read through her introduction before we start taking this one apart. If you notice in her first paragraph, Jill introduces us to the problem that she has decided to research. This ties back to that week 1 problem that you decided to write about in your quick write. She says schools have an important responsibility in educating the future. However, educators cannot be successful in this journey when student safety is in question. Taylor and Goldstein, Collins, and Halder both agree that student safety is not only the human right of every student, but also the responsibility of the school to ensure. Unfortunately, most schools are failing to protect their lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender student population. For instance, in 1995, 85% of LGBT youth reported being victimized. Therefore, these students' opportunity of learning is being compromised, and more importantly, their safety is in jeopardy. Hillard et al. Also report that 90% of LGBT students in their study heard daily negative homophobic expressions. This details the fact that although a near decade has passed between these two studies, LGBT bullying is still alive and well. So the purpose of the first paragraph in the review of literature is to introduce the problem you are researching. But you're not going into great detail about this problem. You're going to do that in chapter 1. So you're briefly going to address the problem you are researching. The second purpose of your introduction in the review of literature is to introduce your reader to what you will be discussing in the body of the review of literature. Let's look at what Jill does. It says, in order for schools to begin creating an LGBT inclusive environment, there are several areas of knowledge, training, and skills that must first be acquired. First, school staff must be aware of the attributing factors, types, and detrimental effects of LGBT bullying. And if that sounds familiar, it's because we've seen it before. That is one of her theme titles. She goes on to say, by understanding why LGBT youth are being targeted and how society and school staff may be unknowingly contributing, educators can become more aware of how to combat this issue. If you go down and look at her second theme title, you'll see that it's staff fears, conflicts, and lack of confidence hinder intervention. She wraps it up by saying, finally, staff must create an LGBT inclusive school environment and share ways of achieving this goal. If you go down to her third theme, you'll see she states the importance of an LGBT inclusive school environment. So the second part of her introduction has prepared the reader for what themes are going to come. And she wraps up the introduction by saying, if schools want to truly provide a setting where all students are valued and have an equal opportunity of learning, then the problem of LGBT bullying must be solved. Before we jump into the chapter summary, I want you to take note of how Jill uses her internal citations. There's more than one way to do this. The most common way to do an internal citation is inside parentheses at the end of what you're citing, like this Hillard citation here. Another way you can do an internal citation is by introducing the author's names at the beginning of the sentence. And if you do that, you need to make sure to put the year inside parentheses. If you have more than one study that is saying the same thing, you're making your case even stronger by including the citations for all of those studies like Jill does here. And if you notice, these go in alphabetical order. So make sure that you are including citations in your introduction. It's not just opinion-based. It needs to be pulled from the literature that you've read. There are a variety of ways you can do those internal citations. And when it comes time to write your themes out for your introduction, you have the option of using the same exact wording of the themes that you created, or you can change up your wording a little bit. Either way, you need to introduce the themes that are coming up in this chapter. So to summarize, the traits for the introduction are to briefly introduce the overarching problem the study's trying to address, to outline what sections and/or themes will appear in the chapter, and the introduction should also include internal citations and not just the author's opinion. If we look at Jill's chapter summary, it says, "This review of literature illuminates important information concerning LGBT bullying in schools. It further offers a descriptive account of the causes, forms, and detrimental effects associated with LGBT bullying. Furthermore, the review has shown that staff fears, personal conflicts, and lack of confidence hinder their likelihood of intervening. Most importantly, the literature review pointed to the positive relationship between creating an LGBT school inclusive environment through pre-service teacher and current staff education and training, activating an LGBT anti-bullying policy, providing varied LGBT school support, and implementing inclusive LGBT curriculum with a decline in further LGBT bullying." So this paragraph right here sums up what was in the themes in this review of literature. It's a repeat of the major points in the themes. The next paragraph says, "Considering this review, little is known about how creating an LGBT inclusive school environment would affect LGBT bullying within United States schools, because in the research located, true inclusion had only been implemented in England and Canada. Although findings in the United States did discuss the positive correlation with a decline in LGBT bullying as a result of teacher education and training. The following chapter will take a look at the design of this study and its method of data collection." So what she did here was address the gaps in the literature and connect that back to the critique of empirical studies. She summarized the gap in literature and summarized the critique of empirical studies. And then the very last sentence, she just sets the reader up for what's coming next. So to review the traits for the chapter summary, it should highlight the most important information from Theme 1 and Theme 2. It should summarize the critique of empirical studies. It should summarize the gaps in literature. And this section should not introduce any new information that was not developed in previous sections. This is the one section where it's okay for you to not cite sources. That concludes our examination of mentor text for the review of literature. For Module 3, you will finish drafting your review of literature by completing the critiques section, the gaps section, the introduction, and the chapter summary or conclusion. You'll want to submit that for the due date in the Module 3 folder.